Hey guys, tonight we set sail on a long, cold, and slightly damp adventure. One that begins in the frosty dawn of Bergen, Norway, sometime in the late 10th century. Picture this. You're standing on a creaking wooden pier. The smell of tarred rope and fish thick in the air. Your breath puffing out in pale clouds. Around you, dockhands grunt as they roll barrels toward waiting ships. Somewhere, a seagull shrieks like it's just heard the worst gossip of its life. And you've got something far more valuable than dried cod or barrels of mead. Nestled under a pile of coarse wool blankets in your travel chest is a gleaming walrus tusk, smuggled in among less interesting goods. You probably won't survive this. If the cold doesn't get you, the sea might. But then again, that's part of the charm of Viking-era trade, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I'd love to know how far this little bedtime voyage is reaching. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots are slick with frost as you edge closer to the ship, a sturdy gnar whose curved hull can carry you across seas, or swallow you whole if the gods are in a mood. Bergen is bustling, even in this bitter morning light. Fishmongers holler prices, women in woolen cloaks haggle for salt, and a blacksmith hammers out a set of iron nails so loudly you feel it in your teeth. Somewhere near the quay, a man is loudly insisting that his barrels contain only the freshest herring, while trying to hide the suspicious smell wafting out of them. The walrus tusk in your possession isn't just a shiny trinket. It's your ticket to a trade profit that could keep you warm all winter. In the Viking world, walrus ivory was as close to gold as you could get without risking a political assassination. Carvers could turn it into ornate chess pieces, religious relics, or sword hilts fit for a king. Historians still argue whether most tusks came from Greenland's icy shores or further into the Arctic, but one thing's certain. Getting one into mainland Europe could make you richer than a petty chieftain with 3 well-stocked mead halls. You glance up to see your captain, a broad-shouldered man with a beard big enough to hide a week's worth of snacks. He waves you over, barking something about not standing there like a frozen fence post. You shuffle forward, the icy planks threatening to send you skating into the harbor. Somewhere under your cloak, you're sweating, not from fear, you tell yourself, but from the sheer weight of the coin this tusk could bring. Bergen itself is a crossroads. The merchants here deal in goods from across the Viking world. Soapstone from the north, furs from the Sami, amber from the Baltic, and if you listen carefully, stories from sailors who've been to places so far south they can't even pronounce them. Quirky fact. Some traders in this period brought back unicorn horns to sell to gullible nobles. Actually narwhal tusks, polished to a pearly sheen. Your walrus tusk isn't quite as mystical, but it's still exotic enough to make a Parisian craftsman weak at the knees. The pier is slick and crowded, so you hug your chest a little closer as 2 men jostle past carrying a crate of live hens. One of them drops an egg, which somehow lands perfectly intact in a pile of snow. Small victories in the frozen chaos. The captain is directing cargo loading with the patience of someone who's been doing it for 20 years, though he keeps muttering about the weather. You know what that means. The fjords might be calm now, but the open sea has a sense of humor as the sky begins to brighten from steel gray to a pale, reluctant blue. You help haul the first barrels aboard. They're heavy with dried fish, the Viking equivalent of a long-life snack. You keep the tusk well hidden. No need for wandering eyes to get curious. There's an unspoken rule among traders. Never flaunt your best goods until you're surrounded by witnesses or walls. Out here, one accidental shove off the pier could mean you and your profits sink together. You take a moment to look back at Bergen's colorful wooden houses, their steep roofs dusted with snow. Somewhere in the narrow streets behind them, children are sliding across frozen puddles, mothers are stoking hearth fires, and smiths are hammering out nails for the next batch of daring fools to try this voyage. This is your last glimpse of home for weeks, maybe months. The thought sits heavy in your chest, but so does the promise of gold. The crew is already teasing each other. swapping sea tales you've heard 100 times. One insists he once saw a whale as long as the ship. Another swears he met a monk who could drink a whole barrel of ale in a single night. You smile, partly because the banter keeps the cold away, partly because you know the truth. The sea doesn't care about your stories as the Nar's ropes are cast off and the ship begins to drift from the pier. You feel that mix of excitement and dread that always comes with leaving safe ground. The sails catch the faint wind, the hull creaks like it's clearing its throat, and Bergen slowly shrinks into the mist. Ahead lies the first leg of the journey, past the dramatic fjords, out into the unpredictable North Sea, and eventually toward markets where your tusk might be worth a small fortune. Somewhere inside you feel the weight of the venture, not just the physical heft of the tusk, but the gamble of it all. Still, the sea calls, and your place is here, boots braced on the deck, eyes fixed on the horizon, heart beating in time with the waves. The Nar rocks gently beneath your boots as you take your place among the crew, the cold wind nipping at your ears like an overeager puppy. The captain shouts orders in that gruff yet somehow affectionate way of his, and before long you're heaving barrels and sacks toward the open hatch. The Walrus Tusk, still tucked safely under layers of cloth, rests in a sturdy wooden chest you keep close at hand, close enough that you could probably kick someone in the shins if they tried to take it. Loading the Nar is a ritual as old as the trade routes themselves, and every man here knows the rhythm. Heavy goods first, lighter or more fragile cargo on top, and nothing left loose enough to roll around like a drunken goat in a storm. Your breath fogs in front of you with every lift, and your gloves grow damp from the icy condensation clinging to the barrels. The crew is a mix of seasoned merchants, younger deckhands hoping to earn their sea legs, and one man who, if you believe the stories, was once a farmer until a goat kicked him in the head and he decided he'd rather deal with the ocean. You're fairly certain he's the one who keeps humming an off-key song about onions. The barrels are filled with dried cod, ale, and the occasional mystery cargo wrapped in tarred canvas. One small keg is labeled with a rune you recognize as mead, but whether it's for trade or for keeping the crew cheerful on long nights is anybody's guess. Historians still argue whether Viking merchants rationed alcohol strictly or treated it more like a traveling morale booster. Judging by the way the captain eyes that keg, you're leaning toward the latter. You roll a sack of wool toward the hatch and pause to flex your fingers. Wool is one of your cover goods, a legitimate trade item that also happens to hide the valuable tusk at the bottom of your chest. Walrus ivory may fetch a fine price, but it's not exactly something you want to declare to every curious customs man between here and the Frankish lands. The ship's carpenter, a wiry fellow with a beard so pointy it could double as a weapon, inspects the load with an approving nod. "Balanced," he says, thumping one barrel like he's checking if it's ripe. He then wanders off muttering about the last voyage, when a crate of salt slid loose midstorm and buried half the galley in a miniature beach above deck. The sailcloth flaps impatiently in the morning breeze. The captain wants to be out before the tide turns, and you can feel the subtle pressure of time in every shouted command. A gull swoops low, eyeing the fish barrels, and narrowly avoids being swatted away by a deckhand with a coil of rope. You pause for a moment, leaning against the railing. The water here in Bergen's harbor is an oily dark green, flecked with ice crystals that drift lazily past. You can smell the salt and the faint metallic tang of the harbor chains. Somewhere behind you, the steady thud of hammer on wood marks the final repairs before departure. It's not just goods you're carrying, it's connections. Every barrel and sack has a destination. A trading partner in Shetland who'll swap wool for smoked lamb, a Dublin merchant with a taste for fine amber, a York artisan in need of furs before the winter market. The Walrus Tusk is simply the crown jewel of this voyage, the one item you know could change your fortune if it reaches the right buyer. A younger crewman sidles up beside you, shoving a bundle of dried herbs into a gap between crates. "Keeps the rats away," he says with the confidence of someone repeating a superstition he half believes. Quirky fact: some Viking crews use dried kelp or even bitter herbs to deter pests, though whether it worked or just made the hold smell funny is anyone's guess. You catch the captain glancing toward the horizon. His brow furrows, not in fear exactly, but in that way sailors do when they're calculating wind, tide, and the mood of whatever sea god they happen to favor. It's a reminder that even with a well-loaded ship and a clear plan, the voyage is never entirely in your control. The last of the goods are stowed, and the deckhands begin securing the hatch. You double-check your chest, running a hand over the coarse wool that conceals the tusk. Still there, still safe. For now. The captain's voice booms across the deck. All aboard, and tie off that loose line before it ties itself around someone's neck. The crew laughs, but you know it's not entirely a joke. Ropes have a way of finding ankles at the worst possible moment. You take your place by the railing as the mooring lines are untied. The nar drifts gently from the dock, oars dipping into the water for the first pull away from shore. The sail catches a clean gust, snapping to life with a sound that makes your chest tighten in a good way. Bergen's colorful buildings begin to shrink behind you. You think about the road ahead, or rather, the sea lane. It's not just about reaching Dublin or York. It's about surviving the unpredictable moods of the North Sea, the haggling in strange markets, and the quiet moments when you'll wonder if the Tusk was worth the risk. But right now, with the deck solid beneath you and the smell of pine tar in the air, you feel ready. Somewhere deep in the hold, the Tusk waits, smooth, pale, and heavy with promise. The nar leans gently as the wind catches the sail, pushing you out into the mouth of the fjord. Behind you, Bergen fades into a smear of colorful rooftops and black rock, the sounds of the harbor swallowed by the slap of waves against the hull. Ahead, sheer cliffs rise on either side, streaked with ice and shadow, their jagged peaks wearing a thin crown of snow. Waterfalls tumble down from dizzying heights, their spray freezing midair in places before shattering into mist near the base. You stand at the rail, feeling the cold bite of the wind on your cheeks, and you can't help but think, if the gods were trying to show off their architectural skills, they couldn't have done much better than this. The fjords are equal parts beautiful and intimidating, a natural corridor leading you out toward the great, unpredictable North Sea. The captain calls for the oars to be stowed. Here, the wind can do most of the work. You and the others coil lines and tidy the deck, careful not to step on the patches of frost that could send you sprawling into the water. A gull glides alongside for a while, its head cocked as if judging your progress, before peeling off toward a distant ledge. Historians still argue whether Viking merchants timed their departures purely by weather or also by certain auspicious dates in the calendar. You're not sure about the scholarly debate, but you do know this. The air is crisp, the skies are clear, and the current seems willing to let you pass without a fight. Small blessings worth noticing. You pass small fishing boats tucked close to the cliffs, their crews hauling nets heavy with herring. One man waves. Another shouts something about the price of wool in Shetland. The news travels fast along these waters. You're reminded that merchants here are like seabirds, always watching, always talking down on deck. The ship's carpenter is carving a small piece of driftwood into what looks suspiciously like a seal. Keeps the voyage safe, he explains, though you suspect it's also just a way to keep his hands busy. Quirky fact. Viking sailors often carved little charms to guard against bad weather or ill luck, which in this context usually meant anything from a storm to a shipment of spoiled fish. The fjord begins to widen, and the swell under the hull grows a little more insistent. You adjust your stance automatically, knees bending with each rise and fall. The ship moves steadily, its oak planks creaking like an old man settling into his favorite chair. Your thoughts drift, inevitably, to the Tusk. Down in the hold, swaddled in coarse wool and tucked into your chest, it waits. Smooth as river stone, pale as winter sun, it seems almost alive in its stillness. You imagine the Walrus it once belonged to, hauling itself onto an ice floe somewhere in the far north, snorting in the cold, blissfully unaware its tusk would one day make this journey. The cliffs on either side grow lower now, their shadows thinning. In the distance, the horizon opens into a silver-blue expanse that seems to stretch forever. This is the last stretch of sheltered water before the real test begins. You know the North Sea can turn from a placid mirror to a snarling beast in less than an hour, and the thought sends a flicker of tension through you. A crewman sidles up beside you, chewing on a strip of dried fish. "Sea looks friendly today," he says, "but she likes to play tricks." You nod. He's right. Out here, friendly seas are just the opening act for whatever mood swing is waiting in the wings as you pass the final headland. The captain plants himself at the tiller, scanning the water ahead. You can see the shift in his shoulders. This is the moment he's been bracing for. The fjord spits you out into open water, and the wind immediately feels sharper, the swell a little more unpredictable. The ship begins to roll in a broader rhythm, the deep heave of open sea. You grip the rail, breathing in the briny air, the scent of distant kelp mingling with the tar from the ropes. Somewhere overhead, the rigging hums like a low harp in the wind, and just like that, you're out of the cradle of the fjord and into the wild stretch between you and Shetland. There's no turning back without losing time, and in your business, time is worth nearly as much as gold. Still, for the moment, the sky is bright, the water relatively calm, and the crew is in good spirits. You glance aft one last time, watching the cliffs shrink into the haze, and then you turn your gaze forward. Somewhere ahead lies your first trading stop, a warm bed in a Shetland tavern, and a chance to check the Tusk before the next leg. For now, though, it's just you, the Nar, and the endless rhythm of sea and sky. The North Sea greets you with all the subtlety of a cat shoving a mug off a table. One moment, the ship rides a steady, gentle swell. The next, a gust slaps the sail hard enough to make the mast groan. You plant your boots wider, gripping the rail as the Nar tilts just enough to make the barrels in the hold thump against their lashings. The crew barely blinks. This is standard behavior for these waters. But you feel the first flutter of that uneasy excitement in your stomach. Not seasickness exactly, more the sudden awareness that the sea is very much in charge now. The sky above is a shifting patchwork, bright blue in one direction, the heavy bruise of incoming clouds in another. Historians still argue whether early Viking sailors used primitive weather-reading techniques or simply relied on long experience, but either way, the captain is already squinting at that darker horizon like it owes him money. You pass the time-coiling rope alongside a wiry deckhand named Kettle, who has the perpetual look of someone who's just remembered they left the door open at home. He tells you about a previous voyage where the sea stayed flat and glassy for 3 days straight, which sounded peaceful until they realized it meant they were becalmed, drifting in circles like an indecisive duck. The wind sharpens, snapping the sail taut. A few crew members adjust the sheets, working in practiced silence. The Nar responds with a subtle lean, cutting through the swell with a satisfying hiss of foam along the hull. The spray is cold, sharp little pinpricks against your cheeks, and it smells of salt and something metallic like wet iron below deck. Your Tusk is wedged in among the wool and fish, each roll of the ship shifting it slightly in its nest. You've packed it as tight as possible, but the North Sea has a way of testing every knot and every plan. You picture it there, safe but restless, like a hound eager to bolt from its leash. A cry goes up from the bow. Nothing alarming, just one of the younger deckhands pointing out a pod of porpoises riding the ship's wake. You wander forward to watch them, their sleek bodies arcing effortlessly in and out of the water. It's almost enough to lull you into forgetting the clouds gathering behind you. Almost quirky fact. Viking sailors sometimes took porpoises as a good omen for the voyage, a sign that the sea was watching over them. Kettle mutters that it's also a sign there's fish nearby, which in his opinion is the only blessing worth having. The wind begins to shift, subtle at first, then more insistent. The captain calls for a sail adjustment, and everyone springs into motion. You haul on the line, the coarse hemp biting into your palms even through gloves. The deck tilts again, a sharper angle this time, and you feel the barrels in the hold bump once more. The waves aren't dangerous yet, but they've grown, rolling in from the northwest in long, deliberate swells. The horizon is a little more jagged now, the ship's bow rising and dipping like a nodding giant. The soundscape has changed too. The slap of water against the hull is louder, more forceful, and the rigging hums like a low note from a stringed instrument. For a moment, you find your gaze drawn to that darkening patch of sky. The air has a faint electric taste to it, as if the weather's thinking about making things interesting. You know enough not to mention it. No point inviting the gods to notice you more than they already have. The captain strolls past, checking lashings, eyeing the horizon again. "She's just stretching her legs," he says, and you're not sure if he means the ship or the sea itself. Either way, the Nar feels alive under your boots now, swaying and rolling with a kind of restless energy. You take another look over the side. The water is a deep slate gray here, flecked with pale foam. Every so often, a gull skims the surface, then wheels upward with a cry that's quickly stolen by the wind. The fjords are long gone behind you. Ahead is nothing but shifting sky and the slow promise of Shetland somewhere beyond the curve of the world. The day stretches on like this, gusts, swells, the occasional splash of cold spray up your sleeve. You work when called, coil ropes, help with small sail adjustments, and keep half an ear out for any talk about the weather. And always at the back of your mind the awareness. The Tusk is down there, riding the same unpredictable path you are, waiting for whatever market, haggling and coin counting lies ahead. By late afternoon. The sun is a pale disk, its light watery and thin. The clouds behind you seem to hesitate, as if deciding whether to follow. For now, the North Sea has given you her mood swings without her full fury, and you're grateful enough to take the gift without asking questions. The moon rises like a pale coin over the restless water, casting a silver sheen across the North Sea. It's beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are, cold, sharp-edged, and impossible to ignore. You're standing near the bow, the wind slipping icy fingers down the back of your neck, when the first sign of trouble appears. A gust hits from the west, harder than before, snapping the sail with a sound like a giant's whip crack. The Nar tilts and rights itself in one smooth motion, but the crew's easy chatter stills. Everyone feels it, the way the air has thickened, heavy with the scent of rain and something else, that strange metallic tang storms carry. The captain moves to the tiller without a word, scanning the horizon. You follow his gaze and see the clouds. Low, fast-moving, lit from within by flickers of distant lightning. Historians still argue whether Viking sailors feared storms, or simply accepted them as part of the bargain. Watching that dark wall of weather creep closer, you're pretty sure a little fear would be healthy. Orders come quickly: reef the sail, lash the barrels tighter, check every rope twice. You join the others at the rigging, pulling the sail down to a smaller triangle that can handle high winds without tearing. The ropes bite into your palms through the gloves, and the cold air stings your eyes. The first raindrops arrive sideways, driven by the wind so sharply they feel almost solid. Then the sea joins in, lifting the ship on broad swells that slap against the hull with a deep, resonant thud. The deck tilts, water sluicing across the planks in narrow rivers that gleam silver in the moonlight. Somewhere below your feet, your chest shifts slightly. You imagine the Tusk, wrapped in wool, wedged tight against the bulkhead, enduring each jolt as patiently as stone. You've done all you can to keep it secure, but you still picture it working loose, sliding across the hold like some pale, tusked ghost looking for escape. Lightning forks across the sky, a jagged white flash that turns the sea into liquid metal for a heartbeat. You catch a glimpse of the crew, faces set, hair plastered to their heads by the spray, moving with the calm precision of men who know panic won't make the waves any smaller. Quirky fact: some Viking sailors wore small Thor's hammer pendants during voyages, not just as religious symbols but as storm charms. You spot one glinting briefly at Kettle's neck before another gust sends him bracing against the mast. The storm's rhythm settles in, wind shrieking in the rigging, rain drumming the deck, the hull groaning as it rides each crest and plunge. You keep low, gripping the rail as the Nar climbs another dark swell and then slides down the other side, the bow slicing into the trough with a shudder. Spray soaks your cloak, your boots are half filled with seawater, and yet, somewhere beneath the cold and the constant motion, there's a strange exhilaration. The captain shouts something about holding course toward Shetland. His voice is nearly torn away by the wind, but the words carry. You know that turning broadside to the waves would be a bad idea, so you hunker down and ride it out. Hours blur into a wet silver-gray tunnel. The moon ducks behind clouds, reappears, then vanishes again. Each flash of lightning catches a frozen instant. The curl of a wave, the spray hanging in the air, the pale blur of the sail. You lose track of time. There's only the next wave, the next adjustment, the next cold splash. And then, almost imperceptibly, the wind begins to ease. The rain shifts from sharp needles to a softer, steady drizzle. The swells still roll, but their edges are rounder, their crests gentler. You unclench muscles you didn't realize were tight. The crew moves more slowly now, checking lines, draining water from the bilge. The storm has passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind a world rinsed clean. The moon glows brighter, silvering the damp wood. And somewhere in the dark water you hear the huff of a porpoise breaking the surface. You let out a slow breath, feeling the thrum of the ship under your boots. The Tusk has weathered the storm with you, silent, waiting, carrying the promise of what lies ahead. Morning comes slowly after a night like that. The gray light seeps over the horizon as if it's just as tired as you are, revealing a North Sea that has traded its snarling teeth for a lazy rolling swell. Your cloak is still damp, your boots squelch unpleasantly, and your fingers have that strange prune texture that says you've been too long in the wet. You lean against the railing, letting the faint warmth of the sun creep onto your face. The air smells fresher now, less salt and storm, more open water and distant land. Somewhere ahead, Shetland waits, a smattering of green and rock in the middle of the sea. But you've still got some sailing before you see its cliffs up by mid-morning. The captain orders the sail loosened again, and the Nar responds like a well-fed horse eager to stretch its legs. The wind is friendlier now, filling the sail with a low, steady hum. The crew is in better spirits too. Kettle has even resumed humming his onion song, which is somehow more irritating now that you're not distracted by lightning. You help a deckhand check the lashings on the cargo. The barrels of dried fish are snug, the sacks of wool haven't shifted, and when you glance toward your chest, you feel a small wash of relief. The Walrus Tusk is still tucked exactly where you left it, hidden in plain sight beneath a mound of trade goods. Historians still argue whether such concealment was standard practice or just the paranoia of cautious traders, but you're not interested in the academic angle. You're just glad it's still there as the morning stretches into midday. A few small fishing boats appear on the horizon, their sails pale against the blue-gray water. One tacks close enough that you can see the crew, 3 men and a dog, all of them watching you with frank curiosity. They wave, you wave back. The dog barks, and one of the men laughs loud enough for it to carry across the water. The captain decides to heave to for an hour, letting the crew rest and take a hot meal. The cook, if you can call him that, produces a pot of thick fish stew, ladled into wooden bowls that are more scarred than smooth. You sit cross-legged on the deck, eating while the ship rocks gently. The stew is salty, with the occasional surprise of an herb that's probably seen better days, but it's hot and filling. One of the older sailors tells a story about the Shetland market. Traders who arrive with rare goods like ivory can sometimes find buyers before they even dock, if the right rumor spreads. But, he warns, wagging a spoon for emphasis, there are always those who'd rather get your tusk for nothing. You nod, pretending to take it lightly, but you know he's right. Quirky fact. In some Norse communities, walrus ivory wasn't just valuable for carving, it was believed to carry a kind of sea magic, making it a popular gift for chieftains who fancied themselves favored by the ocean gods. Whether or not that's true, you're counting on it adding to the tusk's allure when the time comes to sell. After the meal, you help set the sail again. The ship moves on, the rhythm of the voyage settling into that strange mix of monotony and anticipation. The sun slides westward, turning the water a softer shade of silver, and the wind carries a faint tang of peat smoke. You scan the horizon until you spot it, low dark shapes breaking the line between sea and sky. Land. The Shetlands are not grand in the way the fjords are grand. There are no towering cliffs here, no snow-capped peaks. Instead, the islands look like they've been dropped gently onto the water. Green slopes, gray rock, and the occasional cluster of huts near a sheltered bay. As you draw closer, the captain angles the Nar toward a small harbor where other ships are already anchored. You recognize the long, narrow hull of another merchant vessel, and the squat, sturdy form of a fishing boat heavy with its catch. The air smells of seaweed, smoke, and something frying. Maybe fish, maybe something you'd rather not ask about. The harbor is busy in its own way. Dockhands shouting, children darting between crates, dogs trotting along the shore. You feel a quiet relief at the sight of solid ground, but also that familiar itch to find out what news and opportunities this stop might hold somewhere in the bustle of this place. You suspect there's someone who would take a keen interest in a certain pale, heavy tusk hidden among your cargo. The Shetland harbor swallows you in a different kind of rhythm. Less the steady heave of the sea, more the quick, darting pace of a place where news and goods change hands faster than the tide. As soon as the Nar is tied off, a boy with hair sticking out from under a wool cap scampers down the dock, shouting to someone farther up the quay. You can't make out the words, but the way a few heads turn in your direction tells you it might be about the arrival of a foreign ship. The crew sets to unloading part of the cargo: barrels of dried fish, bales of wool, a few kegs of ale meant for local taverns. You join in, keeping your chest close to hand but making no move to open it. The Walrus tusk stays hidden, the thought of it a quiet hum at the back of your mind. Shetland smells of peat smoke, fish guts, and damp wool. The air carries snippets of conversation in a mix of Norse and Gaelic, sometimes both in the same sentence. Historians still argue whether the Norse influence here outweighed the native culture, but looking around you'd say it's less about dominance and more about a messy, well-worn blend. As the last bale is rolled onto the dock, Kettle nudges you. "Pub?" he asks, as if there's any other sensible first stop after docking. You follow him toward a squat stone building with a low door and a driftwood sign swinging in the wind. Inside, the warmth hits you immediately. Peat fire in the hearth, candlelight flickering on rough tables, the faint tang of ale in the air. You order mugs of the thick, dark local brew, and before you're halfway through the first, someone slides onto the bench opposite you. He's a big man with a weathered face, the kind that could belong to a farmer or a fighter, and he wastes no time in making conversation. "Hear tell you came from Bergen," he says, leaning in slightly. "Bring anything special?" The question is casual on the surface, but there's a glint in his eye that tells you he's fishing for more than just gossip. You shake your head with a practiced shrug. "Wool, fish, ale, same as everyone." It's not a lie exactly, just not the whole truth. Quirky fact. In some port towns, it was common for locals to act as spotters for wealthy buyers, sidling up to new arrivals and probing for valuables. Sometimes they were friendly intermediaries. Other times, their information led to less friendly encounters after dark. You and Kettle finish your drinks without offering anything more. The big man eventually nods, as if deciding you're not worth pressing, and moves to another table. The tavern noise swells again, laughter, the scrape of chairs, someone in the corner singing a ballad in a voice that could strip paint later. You step back out into the harbor's dim evening light. The tide has shifted, leaving boats resting slightly askew against the piers. You check the Nar once more, making sure your chest is where you left it, the tusk still nestled deep inside. The Shetland stop isn't meant to be long, just enough to sell the common goods, pick up a few trade items for the next leg, and gather whatever news is worth carrying south. You hear talk of good markets in Dublin, of a warlord in Orkney demanding tolls from passing ships, of a wealthy craftsman in York seeking the finest ivory. That last bit catches your attention, though you keep your face neutral as darkness settles, the harbor quiets. The smell of fish lingers in the damp air, and the flicker of firelight glows from the small homes along the shore. You find a place to sleep in a loft above the tavern, the muffled sound of voices below lulling you toward rest. But even as your eyes close, you can feel the weight of the tusk in your mind, its smooth curve, its promise. and the many miles still between you and the hands that will pay for it. By dawn, the harbor is already awake. Fishermen mending nets on the pier, traders shouting over the thud of crates hitting the planks, gulls circling in anticipation of scraps. You step out into the cool morning air, stretching the stiffness from your shoulders. The tide is higher now, lifting the Nar gently against its moorings. Today, Shetland will be behind you and Dublin ahead. Before departure, there's still business to be done. You accompany the captain to the market square, where stalls huddle together in the lee of low stone buildings. The air smells of smoked fish, peat smoke, and damp wool. A woman sells combs carved from bone, their surfaces worn smooth from many hands. Nearby, a man hawks sealskin boots with the enthusiasm of someone who hasn't noticed the stitching is coming loose. You trade a bale of wool for a sack of dried kelp, popular in Dublin as a seasoning, or so the captain says. You also pick up a bundle of small iron tools, likely to fetch a better price on the other side of the Irish Sea. All the while, you keep your mind on the Tusk, hidden in the Nar's hold. You make no mention of it to anyone, not even the other merchants who greet you with cheerful half-truths about their own cargo. Historians still argue whether Viking traders operated more on trust or on calculated secrecy. From the way you watch every pair of eyes that lingers too long on your ship, you suspect the latter had the upper hand at by midday. The Nar is ready. The last of the Shetland goods are loaded, the fresh provisions stowed, dried fish, barrels of ale, and a few loaves of dense bread that could probably double a ship's ballast. Kettle, predictably, has acquired a jug of the local brew and is already insisting it's for medicinal purposes. The harbor fades behind you as the ship turns southwest, the sail catching a cooperative breeze. The sea is calmer here, the waves a steady, rolling undercurrent that rocks the ship like a slow heartbeat. The crew falls into their routines, some on the oars when the wind slackens, others tending to the rigging, a few just leaning against the rail with eyes on the horizon. By late afternoon, the distant smear of land has disappeared behind you. There's only sea now, stretching in every direction. You settle into the quiet rhythm of the voyage, the creak of the mast, the slap of water against the hull, the occasional call of a seabird. It's in this lull that you finally allow yourself to picture Dublin. You've been there before. The muddle of narrow lanes and open markets, the mingled smells of peat fires and roasting meat, the sound of merchants calling out prices in Norse, Gaelic, and occasionally both at once. Dublin is a Norse Gaelic stronghold, a place where ships from all over the known world tie up alongside each other and goods change hands faster than names are exchanged. Quirky fact: Dublin in this era was not just a market for goods but for information. A trader could arrive with a cargo of furs and leave with news of a feud in Norway, a shipwreck off Cornwall, or a new route to the Frankish coast. For some merchants, the gossip was worth as much as the silver. The wind holds steady through the night, the moon spilling silver light across the water. You take your turn at the tiller, guiding the Nar by the stars, the constellations as familiar to you as the streets of Bergen. The Tusk rests quietly in the hold, but your thoughts circle it often: how to find the right buyer, how to keep it safe until then, and how to avoid attracting too much interest along the way. By the time the first hints of dawn brighten the eastern sky, there's a faint change in the air. The captain, standing at the bow, points toward a low smudge on the horizon. "There she is," he says simply. "Dublin." The approach to Dublin is always a little surreal. After days of nothing but sea and sky, the land rises ahead like a painted backdrop, green fields, low hills, and the darker smudge of buildings clustered along the water's edge. The air smells different here, heavier with the mingled sense of peat smoke and cooking fires drifting out over the harbor as the Nar glides closer. The shouts of dockworkers carry across the water. Ships crowd the quay, slim longships with carved prows, broad-bellied merchant vessels like your own, and smaller fishing craft bobbing between them. You catch flashes of color: red-dyed sails, shields hung along a gunwale, a bright banner fluttering from a mast. The captain guides the Nar into a space between two other traders. The crew moves quickly, tying off lines, lowering the sail, and securing the cargo hatch. You rest your hand on your chest, the wooden one holding your trade goods, not the one beating in your ribs, and feel the solid weight of the tusk beneath the wool. The moment you step onto the dock, the city wraps around you. Dublin hums with movement. Men in cloaks haggling over bolts of cloth, women carrying baskets of shellfish, children weaving between barrels as if born to dodge them. The voices are a blend of Norse, Gaelic, and the occasional snatch of something more foreign, perhaps Frankish or even Arabic from far-off traders. Historians still argue whether Dublin at this time should be called a Viking city or a Gaelic one, but standing here it feels like both and neither. It's its own strange hybrid, and for a merchant like you that means opportunity. You and Kettle shoulder your way into the market quarter. Stalls overflow with goods. Amber beads from the Baltic, honey in clay pots, woven cloaks striped in bold colors, and baskets of apples so bright they look polished. You're here for information more than purchases, listening for the quiet threads of gossip that weave through every deal. Tea doesn't take long. In a smoky alehouse tucked between two larger market halls, you hear it. A craftsman recently arrived from York is looking for high-quality ivory. Not just any. He's said to be the sort that pays for beauty, not just weight. You sip your drink, keeping your expression neutral while inside, your pulse ticks a little faster. Quirky fact. While walrus tusks were prized for carving, the most skilled artisans valued the curve and texture of each piece, sometimes refusing to work with ivory they deemed unworthy. A tusk like yours, long, smooth, pale, would make them lean in for a closer look. Still, you know better than to reveal it here. Dublin is full of ears and eyes, and while most merchants prefer fair trade, some prefer the shortcut of theft. Instead, you and Kettle make small deals, trading kelp for silver coins, swapping tools for a bolt of dyed linen, building the appearance of a modest, ordinary merchant run. The evening finds you back near the docks, where the harbor water reflects the glow of torches. You secure the nar for the night, checking the lashings on the cargo one last time. The tusk is still there, nestled deep, unseen but never out of mind. You sleep in a rented room above a tavern, the hum of the city below seeping into your dreams, laughter, clinking cups, and the distant call of someone advertising fresh oysters. In the morning, you'll decide whether to seek out that ivory craftsman or wait until York, where the market might be even hungrier. For now, you let the thought drift like a ship at anchor, rocking gently in the dark. You leave Dublin behind with the tide, the nar's hull whispering through the water as the sail catches a clean, cold wind. The city's sprawl fades quickly, stone buildings giving way to rolling green hills, then to the vast, low horizon of the Irish Sea. Ahead lies York, but first you must cross to the east coast of Britain, threading the unpredictable waters that lie between. The captain has chosen to join a small convoy, 2 other merchant ships and a long, lean warship whose crew, you suspect, is less interested in trade and more in discouraging the kind of company no one wants. Their presence is reassuring, though the warship's dragon-headed prow looks like it's eyeing your nar in the same way a cat eyes a sparrow. The sea is friendlier today than it was on your last crossing. The swells are broad and lazy, the sky mottled with clouds that drift without hurrying. The convoy keeps close, the ship's sails shifting in and out of alignment as the wind changes. You find yourself pacing the deck, not from anxiety but from the odd mix of energy and monotony that comes with a calm voyage. Historians still argue whether Viking merchants preferred to sail alone for speed or in groups for safety. Watching the coordinated tack of the 3 ships ahead of you, you can see the appeal of company, especially if rumors of pirate activity in these waters have any truth to them. You and Kettle take turns at the tiller, trading idle observations. He swears the sea smells different here. More English, whatever that means. You point out the faint smear of land on the horizon to starboard, one of the smaller isles, but the convoy keeps to its agreed course, avoiding unnecessary stops. By midday, the wind drops to a playful breeze and the ship's slow. The warship's crew sings to keep time on the oars, their voices carrying faintly across the water. It's not a bad sound, low rhythmic, a reminder that even warriors have to pull their weight. Down in the hold, you check your chest. The wool bales are still snug, the tusk still hidden. You run your fingers over the cloth-wrapped length of it, feeling the smooth curve beneath. Quirky fact: some merchants etched runes on the inside of their chests for luck, believing the carvings would guard their most precious goods. You've never bothered, you prefer knots, rope, and vigilance over prayers. The sun sinks lower, gilding the water in soft gold. The convoy makes for a sheltered bay on the western coast of Britain, planning to anchor overnight before heading south through the Irish Sea and into the Humber estuary. The anchorage is quiet, the water still enough to mirror the moon when it rises. On shore, a thin line of smoke curls upward from what might be a fisherman's hut. The warship sends a few men in a small boat to scout, returning with the news that the land is empty except for a couple of wary seals and one very surprised heron. You eat a simple meal on deck: hardtack softened in broth, a wedge of cheese, and a cup of ale that's better than it has any right to be after weeks at sea. The crew settles in for the night, some under the shelter of the awning, others wrapped in cloaks against the chill. The night is peaceful, almost suspiciously so. You lie awake for a while, listening to the quiet slap of water against the hull. Somewhere nearby, one of the other ship's crews is still singing softly, a tune you don't know, but it's steady and low enough to weave into your half-dashed dreams. By morning, you'll be underway again, heading south toward York's markets and the next step in the Tusk's long journey. For now, the sea is calm, the sky is clear, and your prize is safe in the dark, waiting. The next day dawns pale and hazy, the sun climbing slowly over a sea that looks almost shy after the previous night's stillness. The convoy is already stirring, oars dipping, sails unfurling with a soft snap in the morning breeze. You chew a mouthful of coarse bread as you take your place at the rail, eyes fixed on the southern horizon. Somewhere down there, past headlands and river mouths, lies York. The plan is simple: follow the coastline south, then turn inland up the Humber estuary and into the River Ouse. Simple, of course, doesn't mean easy. Coastal winds have a habit of changing their minds without warning, and the shallows here can hide teeth, sandbars and rocks that have claimed more than one careless ship. The sail fills, and the Nar moves smoothly, the other vessels falling into their loose formation. You pass low, green headlands and small villages tucked behind narrow strips of beach. Smoke rises from cooking fires, and once, a group of children runs along the shore waving at the ships until they disappear behind a curve of land. Historians still argue whether Viking trade at York was more lucrative than at Dublin, but the merchants who've worked both say the difference comes down to timing. If you arrive during a major fair, the city's Coppergate district can feel like the center of the world. If you arrive too late, all you'll find are picked-over stalls and traders with eyes already on the next market. By mid-afternoon, the sky has turned the color of tarnished silver. The wind shifts, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and river water. Your first hint that you're nearing the Humber. The estuary is wide here, a great sweep of brown-green water that blurs the line between river and sea. The convoy slows, adjusting to the slower current and the shifting depths. You take a turn checking the hold. The bales of wool are still snug, the barrels unmoved, and your chest sits exactly where you left it. The tusk is fine, cool under your hand, as if it's storing away the chill for the long miles ahead. Quirky fact: some traders believed ivory absorbed the memory of its journey, making it more valuable to certain buyers who prized the story as much as the material. Whether true or not, it makes you think twice about every step of this trip. Evening comes as the ships anchor in a bend of the estuary, too wide and muddy to make much more progress before daylight. The warship keeps watch at the outer edge, its crew alert in the gathering dusk. You sit on the deck with a bowl of stew, watching the fading light turn the water into shifting ribbons of gray and gold. Somewhere upriver lies York, and beyond that, more markets, more bargaining, more chances for the Tusk to change your fortunes. But for tonight, the ship rocks gently in the river's slow current, and you feel, for the first time in days, almost still. You reach York with the morning mist still clinging to the river like a lazy cat. Sell a few ordinary wares in Coppergate. Combs and cloth move fast here. The streets tight with wood shavings, leather scraps, and gossip. And then do what your plan has whispered all along. You turn your back to the ooze and point the Tusk south overland. Dublin gave you rumors. York gave you coin and directions. London promises weighty purses and heavier doors. The Tusk rides swaddled in wool inside a stout chest whose hinges you oiled at dawn. Its pale curve hidden beneath the kind of practical clutter no thief finds exciting. Spare rope, a cracked bowl, and socks that could legally be considered armor. You hire space on a two-wheel cart owned by a man named Wulfric, who has the wiry patience of someone who measures life in ruts per mile. His ox answers to Buttercup, which feels optimistic, but the animal leans into the harness with that steady, unstoppable dignity oxen have, as if dragging the whole kingdom south is merely Tuesday. The road out of York is a compromise between Roman memory and Anglo-Saxon reality. You can still feel the ghost of straightness under the mud, but ditches and detours tug you toward the hedgerows. Historians still argue whether merchants in your era preferred the coastal hop from riverport to riverport or the overland haul along old Roman lines. You're currently voting for whichever route involves less mud in your boots. Fields unroll in winter browns and tired greens. Villages slip by, timber halls, thatch roofs beaded with yesterday's rain. Smoke rising in soft columns that smell of peat and stew. Children watch your cart with the solemn curiosity of small emperors. Dogs announce your arrival as if you're a comet. At every stop, you keep one hand casual and one hand near the chest. The way a juggler always knows where gravity is, mainstream fact. This is Mercia, once a heavyweight among English kingdoms and still a tangle of lordships, reeves, and toll collectors who can produce a fee schedule faster than you can say just passing through. At the first market green, a man with an impressive hat and an unimpressive sense of humor collects a road toll for the upkeep of bridges, which appear to be theoretical. You pay in clipped silver and move on, counting your blessings and your remaining coins with equal care. Midday, you and Wulfric pull off near a copse of alders where a stream fusses over stones. He offers you a wedge of hard cheese and a heel of bread dense enough to stop arrows. You add a sliver of dried fish from the ship's stores, and the ox eyes you with the polite interest of someone who's already eaten. Quirky tidbit. Wulfric swears by lining his shoes with dry moss. For warmth and good luck. You try it. It does make the boots softer, and if luck smells faintly of forest floor, you can live with that. The road narrows to a conversation between wheel and mud. Buttercup plods on. Wulfric clucks. You walk alongside to spare the animal on the mild uphill. The chest bumps gently against the cart rails at each rut, and you listen for the Tusk silence, the reassuring heavy quiet of a thing that isn't shifting. Twice you stop to retie lashings. Once you pretend you're just checking the rope while actually checking your heartbeat. A light joke keeps the wind off. Kettle's onion song has lodged in your mind like a burr, so you hum it under your breath. And when Wulfric asks what tune that is, you tell him it's a Shetland charm to keep wheels true. He nods gravely and hums along, and for the next mile your grand security plan is two adults singing about vegetables. You've had worse. The land opens into broad pasture, sheep nibbling like living clouds, shepherds framed against the sky with crooked staffs and steady dogs. One calls a warning about a boggy patch ahead. Left at the oak with the split crown, and you take it. The cart sinks once to the axle, and you and Wulfric dig and heave with shovels and curses so polite even monks would approve. Buttercup waits like a philosopher. You lighten the load just enough. Barrel here, sack there, your chest never leaving your touch, and rock the cart free. When the wheels finally bite into firmer ground, you both laugh a little too loudly, which is how relief sounds when it forgets its manners. A Reeves man rides up in the next village, a spear slanted across his saddle and a ledger rolling around in the back of his eyes. He asks about your cargo. You list wool remnants, spare iron, and humble odds and ends with the same slow cadence monks use for psalms. He peers into the cart, pokes a barrel, raises an eyebrow at the cracked bowl. and decides you're either harmless or cursed with bad taste. He waves you on with a warning about rufflers in the woods. Wulfric translates: bandits who prefer frightened travelers to brave ones. You glance at the hedgerow shadows and keep your stride even. You've learned this from the sea: fear can ride with you, but it doesn't get the tiller. Afternoon wanes into a pewter light. A drizzle begins, so polite you almost thank it. The road threads a hamlet where a woman sells oatcakes crisped on a griddle. You buy 4, hot enough to burn your fingers, and she throws in a 5th because Buttercup looks earnest. You add a sliver of honey from your pouch. Wulfric's eyes widen like you've performed sorcery. 3 gentle jokes later, about oatcakes, about Buttercup's career ambitions, about your sock's claim to nobility, the drizzle forgets itself and stops. You pass a wayside cross where someone has hung a small tin hammer. It glints in the gray light, and you think of Kettle's pendant rattling in the storm, of lightning stitching the North Sea like a bright seam. Small devotions travel well. You make one of your own, not with words, but with the quiet check of the chest strap and the habit of scanning behind you as often as ahead. Mainstream fact slips into your thoughts again. South of here, the old Roman road meets the great north-south arteries: Watling Street, Ermine Street, stone bones under England's skin. Traders have ridden these lines for centuries. Red tile turning to thatch, Latin to Norse to English, carts forever grumbling about the same stones. Historians still argue whether those Roman surfaces survived in continuous use or reappeared in patches like stubborn memories. Your boots, currently auditioning for the role of swamp artifact. Vote for patches near sunset. You and Wulfric reach a roadside enclosure, half inn, half barn, all smoke and hay. The keeper charges a fair rate for shelter, a fairer one for stew, and a borderline criminal one for a corner by the hearth. You pay for the stew in the stall and keep your back to the chest while you eat. The stew is beans and something that used to be ambitious. It is also hot. You call it delicious out loud until you believe it in the barn. You nest the chest beneath the cart, rope cinched through wheel and handle, your cloak folded over the lid like an ordinary blanket. You bed down close enough to feel the rope with one hand. Buttercup sighs like distant surf. Wulfric snores like rigging in a crosswind. You stare into the rafters and listen for anything that doesn't belong: footsteps, hushed voices, the soft scrape of wood. All you hear is hay settling and the small, exact sounds of night doing its quiet work. Sleep comes in careful inches. When it finally takes you, it's with the measured rocking of remembered waves. The porpoises pacing your wake, the moon sketching silver, the storm's old hum turned to a lullaby. The Tusk lies still, its own kind of sleeping, ivory dreaming of ice, then ships, then roads, then hands that will turn its curve into something everyone believes they've seen before and no one has. Before dawn, you wake once, certain some thread has tugged at your senses. Nothing moves, but you rise anyway. Check the knots by touch, and find them exactly as you left them. That's the lesson the sea taught first and the road repeats. You trust, and then you verify, and then you tie another knot because it helps you breathe. The eastern sky is lifting into a faint, forgiving gray. South waits, London beyond it, coin beyond that, and between all those promises, miles. You shoulder the morning like a cloak, and the cart creaks back into motion, Buttercup steady, Wulfric humming the invented wheel charm, you counting hedgerows like stars. By mid-afternoon the road lifts onto a ridge and then slips down toward a low valley where a bell is doing its steady, persuasive work. You follow the sound the way sailors follow a star, left past a blackthorn hedge, right at a stile shiny with use, and the buildings come into view. Timber and stone folded around a small church, barns, a mill race worrying at a wheel, and a walled garden tucked as neatly as a thought. Buttercup flicks an ear as if to say, finally, people who understand routines. Wulfric points with his whip. Minster, he says, which is Mercian shorthand for, you might get stew and a roof if you're polite. Your feet agree to politeness at once. The gate a lay brother meets you. His cloak the color of river mud and his smile the color of kindness. He asks no more than your names and your direction. then waves you through to the guest yard. Hospitality is the rule here and more than spirit. The rule of Saint Benedict tells houses like this to receive the traveler as they would a guest of honor. And while you're aware that practice often trails doctrine like a lazy dog, the place has the feeling of a story that still remembers how it's told. Mainstream fact. In Anglo-Saxon England, monasteries were among the safest, most reliable places for a wayfarer to seek shelter. With guest halls and bread for the road as part of their ordinary charity, you stable buttercup under a lean-to, and a novice brings hay with the solemn speed of a boy who thinks the salvation of souls depends on punctual fodder. Wulfric straightens the cart's lashings. You slide the chest just far enough back that the wheel's hub can share the rope. Your preferred version of Amen. The Tusk rests quiet under wool, a pale silence waiting its turn. You can almost feel the monk's curiosity gathering like a breeze before weather. Travelers from York, a cart that rides heavy, a chest that never leaves your touch. The guest hall is warm with stew steam and rushlights. You wash at a basin where the water smells faintly of mint. Someone tossed a sprig in. A small luxury that makes your tired hands remember they're attached to a person. At a long table you sit among 4 others. A peddler with a pack of pewter trinkets. A widow carrying thread to market. A tanner who has respectfully tried to leave his trade's perfume outside. And an old pilgrim whose staff is whittled into notches like a count of miles. A brother ladles stew, beans, barley, onion, your old traveling companion returns, and a generosity of root vegetables. You murmur thanks and then discover the spoon moves of its own accord. Joke 1. Second helpings are not provided by rule, but if you happen to set your bowl too near the ladle while asking about the weather, Providence sometimes intervenes. A gray-bearded monk with ink on his fingers joins you after the bell for none, his eyes bright the way readers' eyes tend to be. You've come south from Eoforwick, he says, using the older name for York, and you go on toward London. He asks it like a sentence he's certain is already correct. You nod. He nods back, a conversation of punctuation. The talk falls into those soft grooves monasteries make easy. Roads, tolls, whether the river crossings took shamefully more coin than labor, and whether the barley harvest will sulk again this year. You keep your words plain. Traders learn to be weather, noticed, useful, and rarely remembered in detail. Still, Inkfingers is no fool. His glance slides, purely by accident of course, toward the yard where the cart waits. We have a scriptorium, he says, where brothers copy gospel books and saints' lives. We mount the more precious volumes with carved bone when we can, and with ivory when we cannot help ourselves. His smile is small and amused at his own extravagance. You sip, you nod, you say, fine work. You do not say what kind of pale, hard curve rides with you tonight. Quirky tidbit. The novice who cleared your bowls bursts with a secret and lets it slip. This house keeps bees to improve the psalms. He explains, straight-faced, that a little honey calms throats for chanting. He also confides they sometimes wax tablet edges with the combs to keep the stylus from squeaking in cold weather. You silently forgive every bee you have ever met. After the meal, the guest master shows you the garden. Rows of leeks stand like disciplined soldiers. Sage and fennel crowd the path with good intentions. He touches a bed of feverfew and names 6 ailments it will shoo out of a body if given a fair chance. On the wall, a small sundial carves the afternoon into slices of light. Historians still argue whether such houses in this century kept the full Roman canonical hours with strict bells or a looser local schedule, but your ears tell you this place loves order. You catch the bell for vespers just as the shadows knit at a kindness you didn't expect. The cellarer brings a small beaker of ale for the aches of travel, and the infirmerer, a man who could diagnose a bruise by its ethics, looks at your boots and returns with a strip of linen and a jar of something green that smells like a meadow with opinions. He raps your heel while chatting about a miracle of St. Cuthbert that mainly seems to have involved patience and a good poultice. Joke 2. He recommends rest, which you file alongside. Don't let the sea be windy, under wise counsel from impossible kingdoms that he last. The question comes, carried in like a candle to a dark corner. Ink Fingers returns with a small wooden casket. From it he lifts a carved panel, Christ Pantocrator no bigger than your palm, the lines shallow but sure, the eyes a little too large in that way that makes them seem to see you seeing them. A traveler from the north traded this years ago, he says. Horn, he claimed. But Horn does not take a line like this. He sets it down, strokes it as if it might purr. Where do such pieces begin their lives, do you think? You let the silence stretch to a polite length. Then you answer with the safest truth you own. Farther north than most of us can imagine walking. On coasts where the wind speaks first and louder than you. He accepts the poetics with a nod. There is a saying, he murmurs, that the sea is a road with no inns, and the church builds inns along the land to thank those who choose roads with inns. You nearly tell him about the storm, how lightning unclasped the sky and you tightened every knot you could reach, but you leave the memory where it is. Stitched into the dark under the deck of your mind, Compline gathers the house into the church. You stand at the back with the other guests, the chant rising like gently braided rope. The Latin is not yours, but rhythm is a language and it carries you. The brothers bow and rise. The candle flames lean and recover. The bell is a soft coin dropped into the evening. For a moment, the road, the river, the sea, the markets, the bargainers with their busy hands, all draw back like a tide leaving clean sand. Night in the guest loft is a concert of straw, quiet breathing, and the occasional argumentative mouse. You bed near the ladder with your cloak over the chest and the rope looped to your wrist. Your traveling creed, same as aboard the Nar. Through the shutter gap you can see a slice of sky where 3 stars argue about where dawn will start. Joke 3, Wulfric, pious with fatigue, snores in hexameter, which is impressive for a man who claims never to have met a book on purpose. You think of the scriptorium, of fingers stained the same brown as the earth in the herb garden, of pages ruled with a bone stylus, of letters stepping patiently across a margin like monks on a winter walk. You think of the panel in the casket and the way the monk's thumb knew the grain. You think of your Tusk's long beginning. Ice, breath, the soft thunder of a great animal's sleep, and then men, ropes, boats, markets, and then a road lined with hawthorn and the breath of an ox named for a flower. Somewhere in London, a guild hall waits with ledgers and opinions. Somewhere past that, Rouen and courts with better roofs than sense. But tonight the journey sits, and you sit with it like 2 travelers who have agreed, without words, to share a bench before you sleep. You touch the rope and whisper the same brief nothing you offered the sea. The house settles. The bell is silent. The Tusk is a steady weight in the dark, remembering ice, learning patience, practicing value. In the morning there will be bread for the road wrapped in a cloth, a blessing spoken over motion, and the gate swinging wide. For now you let the chance last note turn into the tide of your breathing, and the night, a gentle steward, keeps watch. The road south from the monastery starts as a well-worn ribbon between hedgerows, firm underfoot from last night's dry wind. Wulfric hums his vegetable wheel charm again, Buttercup leans into the harness, and the cart creaks along as if it too has been blessed. You glance back once to see the minster's roofline framed against the morning haze. Then it's gone behind the trees, and you're back in the company of fields, crows, and the occasional startled hare. By midday, you reach the river crossing you've been warned about. The ferry is a generous description. A flat-bottomed barge lashed together from planks that have all met water more times than they've met dry land. The ferryman is a wiry man with a weather-tanned face and the steady eyes of someone who knows exactly how much trouble a loaded cart can cause on his deck. He scratches his beard, takes in Buttercup, Wulfric, and finally your chest and says, "That'll be double." Mainstream fact. River ferries in this period often charged by weight, with animals and carts doubling the fee, though some ferrymen were known to adjust their weight calculations depending on their mood or the depth of their pockets. You try reason, then humor, then the suggestion that perhaps the river would like to earn more customers by not bankrupting them. The ferryman grunts, unimpressed, and points to the waterline on the hull as if that settles the debate. In the end you pay. though you quietly make a mental note to adjust your trading prices later to make up for the insult. The Tusk, still hidden under wool, rides the crossing without a sound, though you can't help picturing what would happen if the barge tipped. The current is sluggish but wide, the water brown and opaque, smelling faintly of silt and something more ancient halfway across. A gust catches the barge, nudging it sideways. One of the ferryman's sons, a boy of about 12, shoves a pole into the riverbed to straighten the craft. Never trust the current, he tells you, in the tone of a man repeating a family truth. Quirky tidbit. In some riverside communities, children were taught to pull ferries before they could walk steadily on land, the logic being that you may as well master balance before you're old enough to fear falling in. You land with only a little bump against the far bank. Wulfric leads Buttercup off the planks, the ox's hooves clopping on wet wood. The ferryman pockets your silver without so much as a thank you, but you take your small victory in the fact that the chest is still in place, its lashings tight beyond the crossing. The road narrows into a muddy lane flanked by alder trees, their roots knuckled into the ditch. The rain from 2 nights ago has pooled in ruts deep enough to hide an honest eel, and the cart lists once or twice before Wulfric curses softly and guides Buttercup toward the grassy verge. You walk alongside, one hand brushing the chest each time the cart jolts. Late in the afternoon, the sky dims. A low mist creeps from the fields, curling around the cartwheels and your boots. The hedgerows feel closer here, their leafless branches knitting overhead. It's the kind of road where sound travels oddly. You hear the creak of the harness louder than your own breath, and once you're sure you catch the muffled thud of hooves somewhere behind. Historians still argue whether travelers of your era actually feared highwaymen as much as later ballads suggest, or whether the risk was exaggerated to justify tolls and patrols. Right now, you're inclined to believe the ballads. Wulfric glances over his shoulder once, then again, and mutters something about finding shelter before full dark fortune, or the road, provides. The lane opens onto a small hamlet, just a scatter of cottages and a timber-framed alehouse with a thatch roof that sags in the middle like it's thinking of sitting down. Inside, the warmth is thick with wood smoke and brewing malt. The innkeep, a broad-shouldered woman with a laugh like a slap on the back, agrees to let you stable Buttercup and park the cart inside the barn. You insist on placing the chest yourself, sliding it behind a stack of hay bales before covering it with a tattered blanket that smells faintly of sheep. Over a bowl of mutton stew and a half-loaf of brown bread, you trade the day's tension for the slow burn of warmth in your stomach. A fiddler plays by the hearth, the tune hopping like hares in spring. Wulfric even manages a smile, though he keeps glancing toward the barn door. You match the habit. Once the sea teaches you to watch for changes in the wind, you never quite stop to be by the time you climb into the loft to sleep. The mist has thickened outside. The rafters creak, the straw rustles, and somewhere beyond the walls a dog barks twice before falling silent. You keep your cloak rolled for a pillow, the rope to the chest looped in your hand. The Tusk is there, steady and patient, as the road hums quietly under your dreams. Morning breaks in a pale wash of light through the barn slats. You rise before Wulfric, shake the straw from your cloak, and check the cart before anything else. The chest is exactly where you left it. Hidden behind the hay bales, rope still knotted through the wheel, your cloak folded over it as if you'd only meant to keep the dust off. The Tusk waits inside, a quiet, ivory passenger with no complaint about breakfast delays. The alehouse is already busy with villagers swapping bread for ale, gossip for news. Over a mug of small beer and a trencher of barley porridge, you hear talk of London, ships crowding the Thames, foreign merchants in fur-lined cloaks, and a rumor that the guilds are hungry for fine ivory to mount on church reliquaries. You keep your gaze on your porridge, but inside you're already counting the coins in that possibility. By mid-morning, you and Wulfric are back on the road. The land flattens here, the track running straight toward the south like it's following an invisible string. The fields are bare this time of year, plowed into long brown furrows where crows strut and argue over worms. You pass a few travelers on foot, pilgrims with staffs and satchels, a pair of drovers guiding half a dozen long-horned cattle, a boy carrying a basket that smells of leeks. Historians still argue whether merchants in your position would announce their destination to strangers or keep it close. You choose the latter, telling anyone who asks that you're bound, where the trade is fair, and leaving it at that. Wulfric approves, though he also says you could improve your delivery with a winked-up by midday. The road feeds into a busier thoroughfare, one of the old Roman lines, its surface a patchwork of weathered stone and dirt infill. The cart wheels bump and clatter over the uneven stretches, making the Tusk shift slightly in its wool padding. You stop once under the pretext of tightening the harness and take the opportunity to press the chest back into place, the familiar weight settling under your palm. A market town appears on the horizon by late afternoon, its timber buildings crowded along a single wide street. The smells hit you before the gates. Yeast from the baker's ovens, tallow from the candle maker, and the earthy musk of too many animals in too small a space. You spend an hour here trading away the last of your dried fish for a small bag of salt and a roll of fine linen, both of which will travel well and sell better. Quirky tidbit. In towns like this, market tolls were sometimes collected in kind rather than coin, eggs, cheese, even candles. A grinning official actually asks you for a candle for the good of the borough, but you manage to redirect his attention to Wulfric's oatcakes instead. The road south from the town is lined with willows, their bare branches rattling in the evening breeze. You pass under them as the sky deepens to a bruised purple, the first stars appearing between clouds. Wulfric suggests pressing on to London without another night stop, but you know the risks of traveling after dark. The roads are less forgiving when you can't see the ruts, and you'd rather the Tusk stayed whole all the way to the city. You find a small riverside inn, a squat, stone-walled place with a stable big enough for the cart. The innkeeper offers a space by the hearth for an extra penny, which you gladly pay. After stabling Buttercup, you wedge the cart into the corner, chest turned toward the wall, and loop the rope to a post you can reach from your pallet. The common room smells of smoke and roasted onions. A storyteller in the corner is halfway through a tale about a fisherman who married a seal woman, his voice rising and falling in time with the firelight. You eat slow, letting the warmth seep into your bones, until Wulfric dozes off with his head on the table. Outside, the river whispers past in the dark, carrying with it the promise of the city downstream. London is close now, 2 days, maybe less, and the thought makes you turn the rope in your hand one more time before sleep. The Tusk is still, as if it knows the end of its journey is drawing near. London does not so much appear as it surrounds you. The road bends past one last stretch of pasture, and then the air changes, denser, warmer, carrying the sense of smoke, tallow, roasting meat, and too many people in too little space. The city spreads along the Thames like a great, busy tide bank. Timber houses leaning toward each other over narrow lanes, market stalls spilling into the streets, and a forest of masts rising from the wharfs. The Nar was left behind weeks ago in Dublin, but here the water is just as alive with trade. Barges heavy with wool, skiffs stacked with baskets of fish, and broad-beamed cogs from the continent all jostle for space along the piers. Your cart feels suddenly small in this crush of commerce, but Wulfric drives it forward, weaving between drovers and porters with the patience of a man who's been doing this all his life. The Guildhall stands near the market heart of the city, its timber walls high and freshly tarred, its door framed by carved posts that speak of money and order. Inside, the air is cooler, quieter, scented faintly with beeswax polish. A handful of merchants linger near the long tables, speaking in low tones about shipments and prices. Historians still argue how formal these medieval trade guilds were at the turn of the first millennium, whether they operated like rigid bureaucracies or loose associations of merchants with a shared interest in setting fair prices. From where you stand watching a scribe record a transaction with deliberate slowness, it feels like a bit of both. Slow to act but swift to remember debts and favors, you keep the chest closed for now. London is too full of eyes for you to simply lift the Tusk into view and expect an honest deal. Instead, you talk to a broker you've worked with before. A sharp-eyed man named Godric who wears his silver rings where everyone can see them. Over a cup of watered wine, you tell him you've come into something rare, and that you'd rather it found its way to the right hands than the wrong ones. Quirky tidbit. Godric claims he once brokered a deal for an entire shipment of narwhal tusks, sold to a noble who insisted they were unicorn horns. The man drank from one every feast day, he says with a shrug, and swore it cured poison. Whether that's true or just the kind of story a broker tells to make the next one easier, you can't say. Godric listens, fingers drumming on the table. Finally, he nods. There's interest, he says. 2 days. Bring it to the Guildhall then. We'll do it proper. He doesn't ask what you'll do in the meantime, but you know better than to let the chest out of your sight. You and Wulfric rent a stall in a yard not far from the river, close enough to hear the creak of ropes and the slap of water against hulls. The cart is backed into a corner, Buttercup stabled beside it. You double the rope on the chest, then wedge it under a canvas tarp as though it's nothing but spare tools. That night, London hums outside your door. Voices call from the market even after dark. The smell of baking bread drifts in through the shutters. Somewhere a musician plucks a harp in a slow, careful rhythm. You lie on your pallet, rope looped to your wrist, and think of the meeting to come. The Tusk is almost at its turning point. Its long journey from Arctic ice to this city of smoke and silver nearly complete. You can feel its weight, not just in your chest but in the shape of the days ahead. 2 mornings later, the Thames lies under a low, pearly mist that softens the lines of masts and warehouses. You hitch Buttercup early, the cart wheels clattering over the cobbles toward the Guildhall. Wulfric is quieter than usual, which in his case means he only hums the vegetable wheel song twice. You keep one hand resting on the chest the whole way, feeling the subtle jolt of the tusk through the cart's boards with every bump. Godric meets you at the side door, his silver rings winking in the dim light. Best keep it out of sight until we're in the chamber, he says, glancing at the chest like it might sprout legs. You follow him through a warren of timber corridors, the air growing cooler and smelling faintly of parchment and wax. The chamber is small but richly kept. Planked walls, a heavy table, a window just large enough to let in a blade of morning light. 2 men and a woman sit at the far side, all dressed in the kind of sober wool that still somehow costs more than most houses. Their eyes follow you as you set the chest on the table. Mainstream fact. In trading centers like London, high-value goods often pass through controlled spaces like this, partly to ensure proper tax or guild dues, partly to give buyers confidence they weren't purchasing stolen or counterfeit items. Godric clears his throat, gestures for you to open it. You pull back the cloak, untie the rope, lift the lid. The wool is folded away layer by layer until the tusk lies bare. Long, curved, pale as new bone, its surface marked by faint striations that catch the light. Even here, in this orderly chamber, it feels like a piece of another world. The woman leans forward first, her fingers tracing the air above it without touching. Greenland, she murmurs. One of the men shakes his head. Could be Icelandic waters. Historians still argue whether most of the walrus taken came from one or the other. Godric, of course, just smiles like he's been proven right no matter what they decide. You answer their few questions: where it came from north, how it traveled by sea and road, whether it's been worked, not a scratch. You keep your tone even, letting the tusk speak for itself. Quirky tidbit. One of the men says it reminds him of a piece used to carve a set of gaming pieces, small warriors and kings that have already found their way into a noble's private hall. They say the set plays itself if you leave it in the moonlight. He adds, deadpan. The discussion of price begins, polite but pointed. They weigh it against weight, curve, and the clean surface. You name a number high enough to make them exchange glances. They counter with one that would still make your voyage worthwhile. The haggling is careful, each side leaving pauses long enough for the other to wonder if the deal might collapse. In the end, the agreement is struck. A pouch of silver is set on the table, heavier than it looks. You count it, not because you doubt them, but because that's how business is done. Godric watches with that slight smile again, as if this was always the outcome. The tusk remains on the table when you leave, already passing into its next life. Outside, the mist has begun to lift, the city sharpening into focus. Buttercup flicks an ear as you climb back onto the cart, the pouch of silver secure at your belt. The journey isn't over. You've still promised to take yourself to Rouen, but one chapter has closed. The ivory is no longer yours, yet its weight lingers in your mind, as if the memory of carrying it is not so easily set down. You leave London lighter in cargo but heavier in coin, the pouch at your belt making a satisfying, muffled clink with each step. Buttercup seems to notice the difference too. Without the tusk's weight in the chest, the cart rolls easier, the harness lines slackening a little as the ox moves. The road to the coast lies ahead, and with it, your next crossing. The channel to Rouen. The Thames accompanies you for a while, wide and brown, its banks busy with traffic. Barges drift past piled high with firewood, their poles dipping in slow rhythm. Along the towpath, boys lead strings of pack ponies laden with sacks of grain. You pass under the shadow of a bridge and hear the slap of laundry against wooden boards, the women's voices carrying over the water mainstream fact. In this period, Rouen was one of the most important Norman ports, second only to the capital in wealth. Its markets were famed for wine, fine cloth, and the kind of luxury goods like ivory that could travel from the far edges of the known world to the hands of dukes and bishops. You think of your Tusk, now in London's Guildhall, and wonder if its next journey will take it across the channel without you. By midday, the city is far behind, replaced by villages strung like beads along the road. Wulfric, always attuned to the quality of a route, notes that this one is good cart country. Hard-packed earth with enough drainage to keep the wheels from drowning in mud. The salt tang of the sea begins to reach you before you see it, carried inland on a brisk wind. When the coast finally opens up, the channel lies ahead in a sweep of slate-blue water, dotted with whitecaps. Ships ride at anchor offshore, their sails furled, waiting for the tide or a favorable wind. The port here is a huddle of masts and low warehouses, the air thick with tar, fish, and wet rope. Historians still argue whether medieval channel crossings were more dangerous than longer ocean voyages, but looking at the narrow strait churning between England and Normandy, you suspect the answer depends on how much you like surprises. You and Wulfric secure passage on a sturdy-looking cog bound for Rouen. The captain, a square-built man with the weather-beaten look of someone carved from driftwood, sizes you up and names a fair price for 2 passengers and an ox. Buttercup is led aboard with minimal fuss, quieter, you note, than some human travelers you've known. Quirky tidbit. The crew insists on pouring a splash of ale over the prow to sweeten the sea's temper. You watch the liquid run down into the water, wondering if the channel will appreciate the offering. The crossing is brisk but not without its moments. The wind holds steady, but the waves toss the ship in short, sharp bursts, sending spray over the deck. Wulfric leans into the motion like a man who's learned not to fight it. You keep your eyes on the horizon, remembering the North Sea and thinking this is almost gentle by comparison to by late afternoon. The mouth of the Seine appears, a wide, calm stretch of water winding inland, its banks lined with green fields and scattered farmsteads. The ship rides the tide upriver, the air softening as you leave the open channel behind. Rouen spires appear before nightfall, rising above the clustered roofs like the teeth of a great comb. You dock in the fading light, the city warm with the glow of torches and the smell of baking bread. Rouen hums with the same energy as London, but with a different accent, a mix of Norman precision and continental flair. Somewhere in its markets, ivory changes hands just as it did in London. But this time you carry no tusk, only the weight of coin and the memory of the long miles that brought it there. Rouen receives you like a market in full stride, banners snapping above timbered streets, carts groaning under barrels, the clatter of hooves and the low, constant murmur of bargaining in Norman French. You guide Buttercup through the crush, the cart now light enough that she moves with an almost jaunty sway. Without the tusk in its chest, your load is ordinary. A few bales of wool, some small traded goods, and the weight of silver tied at your belt. The quay smells of the river and the last of the day's fish market, salt, scales, and the faint metallic tang of coins changing hands. Dockside taverns spill light and laughter into the street. Hawkers call out oysters, cider, and sugared almonds. You catch more than one flash of carved ivory in a merchant's display. Combs, knife handles, rosary beads, all pale and gleaming. It's almost strange to see them now, knowing the path your tusk might be taking toward a similar fate. Mainstream fact. Rouen position on the Seine made it a vital link between inland France and the open sea, a place where goods from England, Scandinavia, and the Mediterranean all mingled. Traders came not just for the profit, but for the connections, the rumors, the politics, the shifting alliances that could change a market overnight. You and Wulfric stable Buttercup near the market quarter, then wander the stalls. Here a Flemish cloth seller gestures proudly at bolts dyed in colors so deep they seem to drink the light. There a wine merchant offers a taste from casks bound for Paris. You sample a slice of apple tart still warm from the oven and immediately buy 2 more for the road, though you both know they'll never last that long. Quirky tidbit. One stall sells small carved walrus ivory charms shaped like ships, said to protect the owner on dangerous crossings. The merchant swears they work better if bought with someone else's money. You keep your hands in your pockets and move on before he tries to test that theory. As evening draws in, the market's noise thins to the softer clink of shutters being drawn and lamps being lit. You find a modest inn with rooms above the taproom, its sign painted with a crude but enthusiastic rendition of a fish. Over a supper of roasted chicken and cider, you and Wulfric talk over the journey's long trail. Bergen's icy quays, the North Sea's mood swings, Dublin's crowded alleys, York's narrow lanes, the monastery's quiet garden, London's calculating merchants. The road has been a patchwork of smells, sounds, and wary glances, and at its heart always the tusk. You realize as Wulfric begins snoring over his cider, that you'll likely never know exactly where it ends up. Perhaps in a bishop's treasury, perhaps in the hands of a carver who will turn it into saints and kings, perhaps even trade it again for something rarer still. That's the way of things you sell. The story goes on without you. From the window of your small room, you can see the Seine moving slow under the moon, carrying barges toward the sea. You think of the Tusk's first crossing from ice and rock to human hands, and how far it has traveled since. The coin in your belt is proof enough of the journey's success, but you can't help feeling the faint tug of something else, a sense that you've been only a chapter in its much longer tale. Tomorrow you'll turn homeward, but tonight, the city hums outside, the river flows, and the road behind you is heavy with memories. The road home begins under a pale Norman dawn, the mist curling low over the Seine like a blanket reluctant to be folded away. Rouen wakes slowly, bakers stoking ovens, carters loading barrels, barges nosing downstream toward the sea. You and Wulfric lead Buttercup out of the stable yard, the cart light enough to creak more than groan. The chest rides empty now, its weight no longer ivory but the muted clink of silver coins sewn into the lining of your cloak. The first miles are easy, the air cool and damp, the road winding through fields bordered by low stone walls. Villages pass in a slow rhythm. A few cottages here, a chapel there. A yard where geese strut and mutter like merchants haggling over rent. With each step, the memory of the Tusk shifts further into the past. Less a physical burden, more a story you carry. Mainstream fact. Viking traders often returned home with as much in goods as in coin, wine, fine cloth, crafted metalwork. You've done the same, picking up bolts of dyed linen in Rouen and a small cask of cider that Wulfric swears will last the trip, though you doubt it will survive the first week. Buttercup hauls it all without complaint, her pace steady as the turning of the seasons. By midday, you stop near a meadow to rest. The grass is still wet with dew, and the sun has finally burned through the last of the mist. You share bread and cheese, washing it down with water from a clear stream. A shepherd wanders past with a flock, his dog keeping perfect order with little more than a glance. Quirky tidbit. Wolfric claims he once saw a sheepdog so skilled it herded ducks into a barn just for practice. The road tilts gently upward, offering a last glimpse of Rouen spires in the distance before the hills swallow them. The sounds of the city fade, replaced by birdsong and the creak of cartwheels. You find yourself thinking of Bergen, not just the quay where you started, but the smell of its cold morning air, the bustle of ships preparing to cast off, the first lift of the sail as you left the fjord. That was the moment the Tusk's journey truly began for you, though its own had started long before that. As evening draws near, you reach a small roadside inn, its windows glowing against the gathering dark. The keeper offers a place in the stable for Buttercup, and a warm corner by the hearth for you both. Supper is simple: lentil stew, dark bread, a wedge of something that might be cheese if you're generous. You eat without hurry, letting the day's miles settle into your bones. Later, lying on your pallet with the silver tucked close, you trace the road in your mind. Bergen, the fjords, the North Sea, Shetland, Dublin, York, Mercia's muddy tracks, the monastery's quiet gardens, London's crowded Guildhall, the misted Channel, Rouen's markets. Each place left its mark, as surely as the Tusk left its mark on you. The fire burns low. Outside, the wind moves in the trees like the hush between waves. The Tusk is gone now, off to its next chapter, but its memory rests with you, a reminder that every object, like every traveler, carries the imprint of the roads and hands it has passed through. You close your eyes, and the journey folds itself quietly into the past. And so the long road eases to its end. The ship's timbers, the cart's wheels, the steady tread of your own boots, they fade now, leaving only the soft shapes of memory. Bergen's frost, the salt sting of the North Sea, the low hum of Dublin's market, the quiet breath of the monastery garden, each returns like the faint echo of a tide long gone. The Tusk is far away now. Perhaps it rests in a craftsman's workshop, waiting for the first careful cuts of a chisel. Perhaps it lies in a noble's hall, admired by candlelight, its pale surface telling nothing of the miles it has traveled. Wherever it is, its journey continues without you, and that feels right. You were its keeper for a time, and now you've set it on its way. Here in the stillness, the road home is no longer urgent. There are no tolls to pay, no tides to catch, no wary glances over your shoulder. Only the slow breath of night air through the shutters, the faint rustle of straw as Buttercup shifts in her stall, the small weight of silver coin under your hand. Let the pace slow now. Let the thoughts drift untethered, like a ship in calm water. The faces you met, the voices you heard, the places you passed, they can settle into the quiet corners of your mind, safe and undisturbed. The world beyond this room will wait until morning. For now, the journey's work is done, and the road, the sea, and the markets have all grown still. The silver rests. The cart rests. And you too can rest. Your part in this long story gently closing, like a book laid shut beside the bed.